Welcome to the Counting and Clapping tutorial series, created by the junior high band teachers of the Gilbert Unified School District in Gilbert, Arizona. Counting and Clapping tutorial number 4, Ties and Dotted Half Note. At the end of this tutorial, you should understand the definition of the term tie as it relates to written music, how to count and clap notes that are tied together, how to count and clap dotted half notes, and how to count and clap various rhythm patterns containing a mixture of notes and rests that include ties and dotted half notes. To be successful, you need to already understand the concepts taught in these earlier tutorials. All rhythm tree tutorials, basic time signatures and beats, counting and clapping part 1, conventions, Part 2, whole, half, and quarter notes, and Part 3, whole, half, and quarter rests. We'll start by defining the tie. A tie is a curved line that connects two or more notes of the same pitch. Here's a curved line that's connecting two notes that are both on the third line of the staff. Here's a tie that's connecting two notes that are both on the fourth space of the staff. Ties can connect notes of the same value or notes of different values. So far, we've seen a tie connect two quarter notes together, and here we have an example of a tie connecting two half notes together. But they don't have to be the same value. A tie can connect together notes of different values. Here we see a tie that connects a half note on the fourth line to a quarter note on the fourth line. Ties can occur within a measure or across measures. In the four examples we've already looked at, the ties are connecting notes that are in the same measure. But in our last example, we see a tie that connects the last note in the third measure to the first note of the fourth measure. The purpose of a tie is to add note values together to make longer notes. Now let's take a closer look at the purpose of ties and how they work. These two examples are exactly the same, except the top example doesn't have any ties and the bottom example does have ties. The counting is the same for both examples because the types of notes are the same. Let's take a look at the first measure. The first measure of the top example has 4 quarter notes. Each one gets its own count. 1, 2, 3, 4. The bottom example has the exact same 4 quarter notes, so it gets the same numbers, the same counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. The clapping is different because ties connect notes together. In the top example, there are no ties, so every note also gets its own clap. 1, 2, 3, 4. But in the bottom example, we tie some notes together. Count 1, the first quarter note, is tied to count 2, the second quarter note, which makes a longer note. So we clap on count 1, keep our hands together, and count out loud for count 2. 1, 2. The next two notes work the same way. We clap on count 3 because it's the start of the note, keep our hands together because it's tied to the next note. 3, 4. Let's take a look at the second measure on the top. 2 half notes worth 2 counts each. The first half note, we clap on count 1, keep our hands together, and continue on to count 2. 1, 2. The second note, clap on count 3, keep our hands together, going through count 4. 3, 4. But in the bottom example, those 2 half notes are tied together into one longer note. So we clap on count 1, and then we keep our hands together without clapping and continue 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. One longer note. In the third measure, on the top example, we start out with another half note. 1, 2. And then we have a quarter note that gets its own clap. 3. But in the bottom example, we're tying the half note to the quarter note to make a longer note. So we clap on count 1, keep our hands together and count 2, and then also keep our hands together and continue to count 3. 1, 2, 3. In the top example, on the last note of measure 3, it's its own note, it's its own count on count 4. So we clap and count the quarter note on count 4. Then in the next measure, we clap again to start the whole note and keep our hands together while we count 1, 2, 3, 4. But in the bottom example, we're going to connect together, we're going to tie count 4, the last note of measure 3, to the whole note in measure 4 to make one longer note. So we clap on count 4, keep our hands together, and continue to count through the whole note. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's take a look at the correct way to count and clap both of these examples. We'll start with the top example, which has no ties.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Every single note started with a clap because none of them are tied together. Let's compare that.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Now that you understand how ties work, it's time to take a look at a new kind of note. A half note with a dot following the note head is called a dotted half note. Here's a half note and there's a dot following it. So this is a dotted half note. The value of a dotted half note is 3 beats. So we need to put the numbers 1, 2, 3 for the counting under this note. But our time signature has a 4 in the top. So that tells us every measure has to have 4 counts, including this measure. So we need something to round out the measure. In this case, I've put a quarter note there. It could easily be a quarter rest. So count 4 goes on the last quarter note. To correctly clap and count the dotted half note, start with a clap and pulse the rest of the numbers with your hands together while you count it out loud. It's exactly the same as it was for a half note, just 1 count longer. So we clap on count 1 and keep our hands together for counts 2 and 3. 1, 2, 3. And we'll round out the measure with a clap on count 4 for our quarter note. Dotted half notes are directly related to ties. Let's take a look. In the second measure, we have a half note worth 2 counts tied to a quarter note worth 1 count. So we would clap on count 1, keep our hands together for count 2 and for count 3, like this. 1, 2, 3. Then we have a quarter note by itself for count 4, and it gets its own clap. Notice how measure 1 and measure 2 are exactly the same clapping and counting, because a dotted half note is the same as a half note tied to a quarter note. Another way to look at it is with all quarter notes. In the third measure, we have 4 quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 4. But the first 3 are tied together. So we clap on count 1 and keep our hands together while we continue to count the other quarter notes 2 and 3, like this. 1, 2, 3. And then the quarter note at the end of the measure is not tied, so it gets a clap and a count 4. Take a look now to see the first measure compared to the fourth measure. A dotted half note is the same as 3 quarter notes tied together. Here's a video showing the correct way to count and clap these 3 measures. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. We can look at some rhythms where we mix and match ties, dotted half notes, quarter rests, and everything we've learned in this tutorial series so far. We start out with a dotted half note worth 3 counts. We clap on count 1 and keep our hands together while we continue. 1, 2, 3. Count 4 is a quarter note by itself, so we clap when we say 4. The next measure, we start with a quarter rest, so we say 1 with our hands apart, and then we end with a dotted half note, so we clap on count 2, keep our hands together while we finish counting the measure, 2, 3, 4. The next measure has 4 quarter notes in it, so we know we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, but the 2 middle quarter notes are tied together. So we start with 1 quarter note, clap and count, saying 1. Then the next 2 notes, we start with a clap and say 2, but we tie it together and keep our hands together when we count 3. 2, 3. The measure ends with a quarter note by itself and a clap, 4. The last measure has a half rest, so 2 counts of silence. We count 1, 2 with our hands apart, 1, 2. The measure ends with a quarter note followed by a quarter rest, so a clap on 3 and our hands apart on 4, 3, 4. Here's a video showing the correct way to count and clap example number 1.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Let's look at a second example. Example number 2 starts with a quarter rest, so we say 1 with our hands apart. The quarter rest is followed by a quarter note tied to a half note. So we're going to start with a clap and count on 2, keep our hands together, and continue counting the rest of the notes, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 1 longer note. The next measure starts with a half note worth 2 counts, 1, 2, followed by 2 quarter notes, each getting their own clap, 3, 4. The third measure has a dotted half note worth 3 counts, so we clap on 1, keep our hands together for 2 and 3. 1, 2, 3, and a clap on count 4 for the quarter note. The last measure is all quarters. A quarter rest, a quarter note, a quarter rest, and a quarter note. So we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, but we're only going to clap on 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's a video showing the correct way to count and clap example number 2.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Now for our last example. In example number 3, we get a little tricky because we have some ties that go across a measure. We start out the first measure with a quarter note on count 1 that we clap, then a quarter rest on count 2 with our hands apart, and then a quarter note on count 3 that we clap. So the first 3 beats are 1, 2, 3. Now we have a quarter note on count 4. It's the beginning of a note, so we'll clap, but then it's tied to count 1 in the next measure. So we keep our hands together across the measure when we count 1. So that would look like this, 4, 1, making a longer note. Then we have a dotted half note that starts on count 2 and goes all the way across to the next count 1 in measure 3. So we keep our hands together and clap on 2, 3, 4, 1. It would look like this, 2, 3, 4, 1. The next quarter note comes on count 2 in measure 3 and gets its own clap. Now we have a half note tied to a quarter note in the next measure. So we continue with a clap on count 3, keep our hands together for count 4, and then keep our hands together again when we tie across to count 1. 3, 4, 1. Then we have a quarter note by itself, which gets a clap, count 2. And the example ends with a half rest worth 2 counts, but no claps, 3, 4. Here's a video showing the correct way to count and clap example number 3.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
This tutorial defined the term tie and introduced the dotted half note. It explained how to count and clap a dotted half note and notes that are tied together. It provided examples of rhythm patterns containing a mixture of notes and rests that included ties and dotted half notes. The next tutorial in this series adds single and beamed eighth notes to various rhythm patterns.